Hi there. That was a nice fancy countdown. That's the first time I've ever done that. Welcome to the Workplaces podcast. This is a live event. As we've been doing over the last few months, there's been an event on at least every couple of weeks. And what this is all about is connecting with like-minded health and wellbeing leaders in a space that are passionate about creating positive and supportive change in the workplace. Now, I'm Tom Bozzer. I'm the co-founder of Workplaces, and I'm also the managing director at Pinnacle Health Group. And I'm really excited to be speaking with Katrina Walton today, who's the director and founder of Wellness Designs. And they're a boutique workplace wellness business that focuses on strategic consulting and capability building. Katrina, welcome.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having us, dialing in from sunny Brisbane today. So looking forward to our chat.
I'm so jealous of the where you are, because I'm in my backyard here in this little cubby, and it's just sort of on and off rain today. What's the weather like up there?
Oh, do you want to know really? It's a lovely, I think it's 28 today, and also that lovely time of year where there's no horrible humidity with it. So loving these days and getting out, the great outdoors.
Beautiful. Sounds fantastic. Now, Katrina, you've obviously got so much experience in the industry, 25 years experience as according to my research, and today's topic's really around the biggest trends in work wellbeing in 2021 and beyond. And for those listening or watching, the reason for really talking about this topic is because I think it's an important time in the year for everyone in work wellbeing to really sort of stop and reflect. There's been a lot of change in the workplace, and I've talked about that a lot in various episodes and podcasts. But you think back to 2020, it was really around people using the word pivot and unprecedented times and all that. And then I think as we kind of went from that sort of state of mind in the workplace in 2020, we started 2021 with some optimism and maybe a little bit of hope that we were out of this. But we also started with a little bit of a hangover from 2020 when it came to things around work wellbeing or workplace wellbeing. And so, I think what's become accepted really at an industry level, and also with clients that we work with and organisations, is that employee wellbeing is now a core contributor to that will help businesses succeed going forward. But really, hopefully that sort of paints a picture of why today's discussion I think is important and the time is important. Because some teams and some organisations are, generally speaking, just a little bit tired, and they're just trying to get through the rest of this year. And so, often what we're talking about is just stopping, trying to reflect on what we've learned from the last year and a half. And Katrina, this is where yourself and your team really come in, because I know you've done a lot of research yourself into this space, especially into what's been going on in the last year, and probably also where we're heading with all of this as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tom. No, I think what the last 18 months has really reiterated is that health really does matter. And to your point about it being a business imperative, I think it's also shown that those organisations that invest in their greatest asset, being their people and their wellbeing, are not only going to be the ones that pull through most strongly through this period, but also going to be the ones that are going to be remembered. So what does that mean for wellbeing at work looking forward, as you're saying, to next year? We actually surveyed our expert faculty recently who are thought leaders across different areas of wellbeing across the globe as to their reflections on the past 18 months, but also their predictions looking forward. And I'm really excited to share some of those 7 trends with you today, Tom.
Yeah, great. Really nice summary, Katrina. I think what you said at the start around the employers that do this well will be remembered. Really good point. I mean, you've probably read a lot about I think it's been called or termed the Great Resignation, which is that, that trend of people leaving workplaces. Work wellbeing really on a number of fronts, but sort of that talent attraction and retention obviously is a huge one as well. Katrina, that's probably a good segue into the purpose of this topic around you've got so many experts in your network and your faculty, I guess. Let's get into these trends now, and let's talk about, so from 2021, what are the biggest trends that you've seen? Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah, no, we'll kick in. And I think just to set the scene beautifully, there's some great work from the likes of Dame Carol Black out of the UK that you might have come across some of her work. Tom, who's a leading academic in the area of work and health. And she was quoted as saying, the pandemic is really an opportunity to seize the moment, to really, I guess, elevate wellbeing to the boardroom, and also as an opportunity to, extend it to our broader communities and families as well. And we'll get into that as far as some of these trends. But I think certainly the last 18 months, has reiterated that the future of work is here. And what we've seen is a real fast tracking of the 6 mega trends for safety that the CSIRO and also Safe Work at Australia had predicted back in 2018 in their workplace safety report. You're nodding, Tom, sounds like that's a report you've come across as well. And some of the trends at the time that they identified was the rise of the gig economy, was managing an ageing workforce. They predicted an increase in work-related stress and mental health issues, and also those blurring of work and home lines, and also an increase in sedentary activity as well. And Dr. Angela Martin, as she highlights in the guide, the pandemic has resulted in an increase in the impacts of work, particularly on mental health, both positive and negative, from rising levels of mental health issues to those of us that have been impacted with multiple lockdowns, potentially working remotely for the first time, maybe juggling caring responsibilities on top of all that. And there's been a lot of commentary around particularly females bearing a big brunt of that as well. So we've seen an increase in recognition of the importance of psychosocial safety within the workplace, and also social connectivity, that importance as well. And that's also coincided, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners are aware, with the release of the new ISO standards for psychologically healthy and safe workplaces, and some related codes of practice out of the likes of New South Wales as well. So there's much more onus on employers to provide mentally healthy workplaces and the obligations around. So what does that mean, I guess, for workplace wellbeing delivery? Like I said, we are seeing an increased onus on mental health in the workplace. But what I would say with that and encourage organisations is still very much to look at a holistic and integrated strategy that sits above that. So, Tom, I don't know if you have any similar reflections there.
Yeah, well, that certainly nails all the different parts of the rapid change of the workplace, like you mentioned, the gig economy, the mental health side. And I know, I'm speaking on behalf of lots of Victorians, I guess, because I'm in Melbourne right now, just the juggle of like the blurred lines between work, obviously parenting, or trying to homeschool. And you mentioned also females feeling the brunt of that. There's a lot of, I guess, stuff coming out to suggest that females are still doing all the housework, or doing most of the housework. That's generalization, of course, but that's where that fits in, of course, is that creates really, I guess, unclear boundaries of, cool, when do I start and finish work, and how the hell do I fit it all into my working day? Because those working days, I've got people that I know that are parents living nearby, and they're splitting their day right up the middle. One's starting at 6 a.m, the other one's and then they swap over to look after kids, and then they finish at like maybe 10 o'clock. So it's really like these, I guess, extensive lockdowns have not helped the well-being of all of those, mostly knowledge worker type environments, or office work type environments. So yeah, really, really interesting. The other one you mentioned was the ISO standards, or the introduction of that. That's been a huge one, and there's so much in that probably needs a whole nother podcast on, right?
A whole other episode. That's right. But that leads nicely then into the second trend. I think it's also reiterated that good work is good for you. And certainly, given we spend a third of our life at work, the workplace has been identified as a really important setting for preventative health. And we know that work can have a really positive impact on our well-being through rewarding, stimulating, challenging work and purposeful work, but it can also have the very opposite effect. So whether that be poor work design or insecure work, which we've seen a lot in this, climate. And as Professor Nikki Ellis states in the guide, what we've seen is probably the pandemic serving as a real illustration of good work, what good work is. And I think we've seen, overall a positive experience with, working from home. I think we've seen employees given more autonomy, more flexibility. Managers have had to learn how to communicate, with hybrid teams. So there are a lot of positive spin-offs there. But what we've also seen, I think, picking up on your earlier point in the intro, Tom, is we have seen a lot of people rethinking their careers, whether it be through necessity, whether it be through choice. And there was some research in the height of the pandemic which suggests approximately 3 million Australians were in that boat. So it's a real opportunity to step back and look at what's really important. So what does that mean from a wellbeing delivery point of view? I think what we're going to see is employee wellbeing becoming even more embedded as part of that employee value proposition, linked into that war for talent. And we're seeing that in the likes of accounting and other sectors where they're really struggling to find good people.
Yeah, really good. I've just put a comment up there. Conrad, who was on the show last week, says, good work, it's good for you. I love that. Couldn't agree more, Conrad. I really like that one because I think if you go back to, I guess, the workplace of old, meaning, pre-pandemic, you think about there was a lot of even just hybrid models of work going on anyway.
Yes.
But I think almost that rapid change sometimes, whilst it's uncomfortable, it means that you have to adapt. You have to change your ways. And I think speaking from, I guess, my experience firstly was as a leader of Pinnacle Health Group, my first thing was, well, how the hell do I communicate, stay in touch, do it at an appropriate cadence, and do people care do they need me checking with all? So it was all of those, I had to really work that out myself, and I was doing like weekly video broadcasts out to the team, and I was trying to connect with everyone individually, one-on-one, and I was probably overdoing it myself at the start. But now that we've settled down and we're in a rhythm, and also the work that we're doing is more clearer focus because the initial shock and change has already happened. It feels a bit cleaner and a bit easier for me personally from a leadership perspective, and how that fits in, I guess, to the whole workplace is that there's many other leaders in every business also going through the same thing. So, by now you'd expect that most leaders would have adapted and found new ways to lead through the change.
Yeah, that's right. And it was a really interesting period for us because as a team, we were already working remotely. We have a team across Australasia, so that's was business as usual for us. So it was interesting to watch. You forget it was a big transition, for a lot of people. So, and a learned skill, as you say, for a lot of leaders as well. So that leads nicely into our nice segue into trend number 3. That is, hybrid and remote working is certainly here to stay. The genie is out of the bottle, so to speak. And there was research released actually by the Productivity Commission last week that you might have seen, Tom, showing that in the last 2 years we've seen an increase from 8% of Australians working from home now up to 40%. And there's been countless surveys to show that we're somewhat reluctant, to go back to the physical office. And we had Melissa Marsden from Community, as she talks about in the guide as well, that's going to lead to, I guess, a decoupling of work from location and I guess more intentional work when we do come together. And some of the benefits as far as, team cohesion and innovation, when we do collect together as a group. I'm a big fan of Yuan Chouinard, the CEO of Patagonia. I don't know if you've come across his book, Tom, Let's Go, or Let My People Go Surfing. And, they've been a great advocate of flexible working for a long time. And there's a wonderful quote, which I'll read, which he says, "You go surfing when there are waves and the tide and wind are right." And I love that. And I think, even for us as individuals, we know when we can be, working at our best. You might be more a morning person, or you might have had to change depending on other things that you're juggling. But I think with the pandemic, we've seen that shift from hours spent at desk to more that, results orientated approach. So be interested to see if you've seen that shift with your clients too, Tom.
Yeah, definitely. I think that quote is great, by the way. It actually reminds me of when I used to work as a physio about maybe 14, 15 years ago down in Torquay in Victoria. And I remember the days were long, but I would, with the boss, it was always 2:00, let's go surfing. It was kind of like a break. So But I think what people are doing with our clients, some of the clients that we know, it's really, and we kind of had a little run at this earlier in the year where there was some return to office. People were just coming together to do collaborative work, and then those other days, and it ended up being around 2 to 3 days in the workplace, and then the other half at home. And then when they would go home, they would be just doing their deep work. And a lot of the discussions I had was just around energy. So just talking about energy management. So when do you work best? Let's make sure that you're collaborating on those days if you feel like it, or if it's more around matching your energy with that deep work, then do that. Yeah. So we ended up finding that people were coming in to the office on Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays, Monday and Friday, generally speaking, we're kind of more at home.
Yeah. And as far as what that means for wellbeing delivery, I guess looking at more multimodal delivery options, which I think is only a great thing, and on-demand viewing where people can, when it suits them, download that information. I think that's led to more equitable access maybe to what we had previously. And as Dr. Judd Allen highlights in the guide as well, we've also seen that extension to the home environment and fostering that wellness culture at home and our broader communities, which again, I think is a really positive upside of the pandemic as well. I don't know if, Tom, there's anything else you want to add there, or go on to trend number 4?
Yeah, I think with the bringing in the delivery mode of wellbeing services being for hybrid work, obviously had to change compared to what we were all doing. So, more online. But what we saw practically in the field or through our clients was you'd see examples of like kids joining in with their parents on whether it was a workshop or a mindfulness type activity or something like that. So it was really cool to see some of that vision, because I guess the community being the workplace is one community, and then the community that also that within the families of the wider community, that ripple effect's obviously pretty important and can be quite a nice way to, I guess, for the company as well, to show that they're delivering wellbeing on a bit more scale.
Yeah, definitely. Just bringing back memories of one of the lockdowns and doing, was it PT Joe with my daughter, in the lounge room as well. So saw a lot of nice families doing exercise, which is again a nice silver lining. The next trend, a shift I think too from employee experience to life experience. So what we know is that one size doesn't fit all, and I think the pandemic has just served to amplify this further. And I think there was that quote that was going around by Damien Barr about we're not in the same boat, we're all in the same storm. I think that's changed a bit now. Given where we are in different parts of the world. But I think it really reiterates that we need to get to the heart of the health and wellness issues for our people. And I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic and the blurring of those, work-life lines is that it's enabled us to really value the whole person. And I think with that, we have seen broadening of wellness strategies to be more holistic. I think it's heightened the importance of social wellbeing and financial wellbeing, and particularly mental wellbeing, as we were saying earlier, has been amplified. So as far as what that means for delivery, I think we have seen that more holistic view of wellbeing, which I think is a really positive thing. And I think too, more personalisation of wellbeing initiatives as well, and again, leveraging technology to do that. So that's, again, some of the things we've seen.
With the personalisation of the delivery of wellbeing, and some of those, I guess, different sort of aspects. We know we've sort of heard financial wellbeing and social wellbeing's really been important for the last 12 months or longer, because everyone's disconnected. Is there anything that's come out, Katrina, that you've seen that's a little bit like more left of centre than that, or is that really the stuff that you've seen out there?
Yeah. I think, going back to the earlier comment, I think it's moving more from that general employee experience to more a life stage approach, to wellbeing in the workplace. So whether it be, graduates just starting, like financial wellness is a good example. What will be relevant education and awareness raising for, say, a graduate who's starting out through to someone that might be transitioning to retirement is going to be quite different. And even as we talk about in our training and our practitioner training, Dom, just down to the way that it's marketed and positioned, the messaging is very different. So we always always encourage our students, to have different marketing campaigns for different groups, within your workplace, tapping into the pain points for those people. So by personalisation, I think it's also tailoring of the messaging to different groups within the workplace.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, in some organisations that we work with, if they're quite big, you've got maybe people up one end of the age on one age bracket and the others down here. So if you say the same thing to both parties, you're going to get different levels of engagement. And I think that's what I've seen as well practically is through some of the technology options that are out there and platforms and things, you can almost use, I guess, nudging behaviours based on their predetermined, features of them or their preferences and that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think too, working with your providers in that case, if they're providing with marketing collateral rather than the stock standard imagery, asking them, have we got an increased diversity of images available? Even better, can we use images of our own people just to make it further tailored to our audience? Yeah.
Yeah. I've just got a comment here from Melanie White, who's a connection of mine. So she's just said, personalised solutions are essential for feeling heard, respected and getting buy-in. And as you say, Katrina, it must also come out in the marketing. That's a really nice point by Melanie about being feeling heard and respected, because sometimes that's where it gets missed. If it's broadcast marketing, one solution for every person, it just doesn't work. So yeah, thanks Melanie for that. That's great.
And again, if you're doing that initial needs assessment, well, that's going to allow you to geo-target and target some of those different subsets. The next one is moving beyond the silo. And again, I think one of the positive spin-offs we've seen is much more integrated and multidisciplinary approach to addressing health and wellbeing within the workplace. So we've seen a real, rather than just being the wellbeing person, we've seen a real coming together of, L&D and HR and safety and social responsibility and other relevant groups to address health and wellbeing issues and challenges for their people. And what research tells us and what our experience tells us is that's also going to deliver a greater value on investment, for those companies. So for example, instead of updating flexible working practices being, HR's domain, there's a lot of people that really need to have a seat at that table, so to speak. So what does that mean for delivery, again, of wellbeing? So as we advocate in our training, it's really getting a clear sense of what those needs are for your people, relevant consultation with a number of those groups as well. And then, I guess, tackling that issue, not just from an individual point of view, but also looking at the policy, the culture, and environmental context to support that. So certainly that's the approach that we advocate in our training.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's really nice to hear that there's more parties coming to collaborate to then create, because you're right, it used to be that it just would fall with maybe one person that was, you're the wellbeing person, but they're also doing some other functions. I'm just interested on that point, Katrina, is there a certain size of business where you'd get to that size of maybe it's 1,000 employees or something where you need a lot of people, or are you finding that, say, if it's under a certain number of people in the organisation, is it still one person practically, or what are you seeing?
So that's as a dedicated wellbeing resource, Tom? Yeah.
Yeah.
There was some work by Michael O'Donnell out of the United States, and he had a ratio of 1 FTE to 1,800 in employee or FTE as a bit of a guide. We talk about that in our training, but as we discuss in the training, that really comes down to the broader governance and infrastructure within the organisation. So there's one large telecommunication client that we have. I think they have approximately 18,000 employees. They have one wellbeing manager, but they outsource a lot of different elements. But secondly, in their words, they have a cracking champions network where they have people on the ground in their 100 or so locations that are then driving that wellbeing agenda. So it's one of those, I always say it really does depend. It depends on, how or where wellbeing sits in the organisation. It depends on, the number of sites and other factors that come into that. So we'll talk about that a bit in one of the trends, but champions networks, particularly if you've recruited and trained and supported them well, they can be literally your army out in the trenches, so to speak.
Yeah, really great point. Yeah, thanks, Katrina. Yeah, happy for you to keep going through the next trend if you like.
Great, conscious of time. So number 6 trend, I think that strategic approach continues to be key. And I think we've really seen a shift. I know we've had some conversations, Tom, around this from the, should we be investing in employee wellbeing to the how do we go about it, or we've tried wellness before, it hasn't worked, and we want to do it right this time. And I think the reality is, companies are being very considered and scrutinising where they do spend their dollars and resources. So they want to make sure it is getting the maximum value on that investment. There was research by McCrindle that was done in October last year where they surveyed over 1,000 Australian workers, and 7 out of 10 reported that their leaders were placing more onus on employee wellbeing, which was really encouraging to see. And there was also a report by Aon, their global wellbeing report that was released this year. They surveyed over 1,648 companies across 48 countries, of which there was over 500 of those in APAC. And they found that wellbeing, 90% of companies in APAC did have wellbeing initiatives in place, but only 55% had a strategy. So certainly, whilst that appears to be higher than other similar surveys that have been done by other groups over the year, I think there's still a lot of work to be done, Tom, as far as a more strategic and results-orientated approach to wellbeing.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think it's nice to hear that that people are considering more strategic. I know, yeah, we've talked about this before. I feel like it's been really hard over the last 12 months for companies to plan ahead and to be strategic when the macro environment has changed quite a lot. But I feel like around this time of year, we're chatting with our clients around being more strategic in the years ahead, because the changes that have happened are staying in terms of the hybrid workplace. So you kind of now know all the major changes that are going to occur. So now it's about analysing all the different factors in wellbeing and sort of starting from the start. What do you want to achieve? How do you want to frame it? Where does it sit in your organisation and that kind of thing? So yeah, really love that one.
Yeah. And I think, to pick up on one of your points, I think there's also the reality lens where we can take a strategic and longer-term vision of view. We also need to be able to be responsive and agile at the same time. And I think we're finding a lot of our clients are having shorter planning cycles, for the immediate initiatives, but they've still got that long-term strategy as to what they're setting out to achieve. So we're doing quite a bit of rework with clients at the moment, just tinkering their plans, best laid plans and all, Tom. Sometimes we need to,
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I've been reluctant to use the word roadmap with clients because of that's being used a fair bit in the government circles. But yeah, we've had to be adaptable as well through this time with our clients, not getting too far ahead, but still kind of at least having an understanding of where you want to go with it, I think is important.
Yeah, definitely. And then the final trend, number 7, is we're seeing that real increase in wellbeing as a core internal capability for organisations. So at that leadership level, leaders playing that really important role in driving that wellbeing agenda within the business, and also they need to be well to lead well themselves, to perform at their optimum. And they've certainly stepped up, through this pandemic period. Second for those practitioners, so those that are, developing and leading the strategy within the business, and as we've already spoken about, at that champions level as well. And there was a study that was done by ARI in the height of the pandemic in July, and they surveyed over 1,000 HR and business leaders, and actually managing employee wellbeing was rated as the top stressor for them at that period. And then they did another pulse survey in October of over 1,000 HR and business leaders. And what was interesting is they looked at the top 5 skills that were going to be needed to navigate successfully through this period, Tom. And they found that, again, managing employee wellbeing was one of those top 5. But what was, I guess, interesting to us was that 36% of those didn't feel confident their team had, only 36%, if I get that stat right, felt confident their team had the skills. So there was a skills gap there. They recognised the importance, but they didn't necessarily feel they had the skills to drive it. So that's why we're really excited to be partnering again with Deakin University again for their MBA Masterclass program, where we've got a dedicated masterclass, a micro-credential on work and wellbeing, targeting those current and emerging leaders. So it is part of their, toolkit, so to speak, in those roles. Yeah.
That's fantastic around, the MBA at Deakin. That's really cool that you're getting in at that level. On the topic of building capability, I guess actually I might ask you something else. Firstly, we've seen a lot about, we've talked a little bit around the Chief Wellbeing Officer as like a role or a potential role in organisations. I'm wondering, from your perspective, Katrina, being in this space and kind of knowing the industry quite well, Where does the Chief Wellbeing Officer fit into organisations, and are we kind of ready for that yet, or where's it sitting in your opinion?
Yeah, great question. And I know you've had some great discussion on this on LinkedIn on some of your and Josh's posts. So, I guess I'd probably even go back a step prior to the pandemic. Back in 2018, there was a survey done by Smart Company magazine, and they actually rated dedicated internal wellbeing managers as in the top 10 fastest growing roles in Australia, both for desirability and growth. And they put that down to an increased recognition of companies back then as to the business imperative for investment. So we've certainly been observing that trend for a while. I think you mentioned the intro. I've had the great pleasure of working in this field for 25 years, and going back 20 of those years, I was working chief wellbeing roles in very progressive organisations that certainly saw the value. So I guess we're on trend in that way, Tom. Finally,
trending early. That's 20 years ahead of your time. That's awesome.
That's right. So I think two things we're observing. We're seeing, particularly off the pandemic, and we actually did a dedicated webinar on this, which is available on our website for those interested on advancing your career in the sector. So we're certainly seeing across all industries, companies appointing dedicated wellbeing roles, particularly in those industries that have been harder hit. So like your health and aged care, emergency services, particularly education is another sector, I would say. But we're also seeing a broadening of traditional health, safety and HR related roles to a more encompassing approach, integrating wellbeing. So Director of Safety and Wellbeing, Director of People and Culture and Wellbeing, employee experience is another sector, which is again including wellbeing. So we're seeing a real trend in those types of roles, and we actually developed a free career guide for that. That's a free download again on our website if you're interested, on some tips on how to position yourself, in pole position, I guess, to take advantage of some of those opportunities. As to where it best sits within organisations, we talk about this again in our training, and it again is one of those really does depend. There was a survey done by Buck Consultants a couple of years ago now, and they do a survey every couple of years looking at trends in this sector. And I think it was around 70% of the time it did tend to sit within HR, about 30% of the time in safety here in Australia, and about 30% were dedicated roles. Sometimes it added up to more than 100% because sometimes those wellbeing people also sat in those areas. So we always give the view it's where it's going to get the CEO's ear, where it's going to get the best traction, ideally a seat, as you were saying, at that executive table as a chief wellbeing officer or equivalent. So, but as we said before, it's not just about that wellbeing person, it's also about building that capability at all the different levels of the organisation, because certainly what we've seen with a lot of our clients over the year, if that passionate wellness person leaves, the whole thing can crumble down if it hasn't been really embedded and ingrained in the broader business.
Yeah, really good point. That's your, this is Josh saying here, the Cracking Champions Network. I love that one. That's pretty cool, because if you don't have that and that person leaves, and if it's just a big fancy title, then you're probably going to struggle when things change, or when the organisation starts to change, because that's just inevitable in this day and age, right? Katrina, if the gap really is, I guess, from the lack of, I guess, skills, or for health and wellbeing people that are passionate but want to build their capability in this space for themselves and for their careers, but also for the organisation. Do you have any advice on best places to start, or how do you build capability in this space besides having a go and doing it practically?
Yeah, it's a great question. And often what we do see is, with all best intention, people often running wellbeing off the side of the desk, in addition to their real role. So as you said, part of that building capability is providing people with the necessary training and skills to develop and implement and monitor a best practice strategy for that business, and that can also involve bringing in partners such as yourself based on the identified needs. A great comment from Alison there as well. So certainly that's a key component, and I think the wonderful thing about the actually accredited practitioner training that we deliver for that purpose is to upskill those people who are not only working internally but also working more, in a provider type role, is the wonderful diversity of people coming through, Tom. So, to that earlier comment, HR, safety, injury work advisors, return to work coordinators, organisational development, organisational psychologists, allied health professionals. And what that leads to is this wonderful richness of conversations and experience and this melting pot. We're all learning from each other, and I think there's a real value to that. And then we have what we call the hub, which is essentially a membership site, a knowledge centre where that community comes together after the training. So that would be the other thing I would say. It's that lifelong learning. Yes, you can do an initial course and get a nice statement of attainment in our case with our RTO, but it's about, as we're seeing at the moment, it's just so much change and it can be very overwhelming. So what a lot of people tell us coming to the course is, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I want to hear from others and what others are doing and what's worked, and I want to connect with other like-minded people and learn from them. So, and we're learning ourselves, every time we run an event like this, we're learning from expert contributors like yourself who come along. So I think it's we're trying to provide that one-stop training accreditation community for like-minded professionals to come together and navigate this journey together.
Yeah, great summary, really. Yeah, I think for those listening that are interested in building capability, I'd highly recommend having a look at Wellness Designs, the website, and just checking out the different resources as Katrina has put it there. It's in this ever-changing environment in the world, there's no really right and wrong answer to a lot of the moving questions that are coming. So it's really around being adaptable is really key, and the learning, testing, and reassessing things on the go is really, really important. I really feel like that's a great place to finish our chat, Katrina, because you've covered off everything really nicely. I just want to say a big thank you for your time. I know you're a busy person, and you've brought a lot to the table today with all your insights and all your knowledge. So I really appreciate it. And for those listening or watching, I'll be following up with some resources that where you can explore a little bit further. But thank you again so much, Katrina. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom, and look forward to many further conversations to come as well. Thanks for the opportunity today.
No worries. Take care. See you later.